I hadn't opened my front door to a stranger in 25 years. The knock came on a Tuesday morning, just after my coffee finished percolating. She stood there holding a notebook, smiling like she expected to be welcomed. Something in her eyes felt uncomfortably familiar. I almost sent her away. I wish I had known what that knock would unlock. I live alone in a small ranch-style house outside Dayton, Ohio. Beige siding, white trim, the kind of place you forget as soon as you drive past it. That suited me just fine. I'm 70 now, retired, and I've perfected the art of being unnoticed. People think solitude happens by accident. It doesn't. It's built slowly, brick by brick. You stop answering calls, then cards, then holidays. Eventually, even silence stops feeling loud. The morning Jade knocked, I was standing at the counter, hands wrapped around my chipped mug, the one with the faded library logo. The percolator hissed softly, filling the kitchen with that bitter, comforting smell I've relied on for years. The grandfather clock in the hallway chimed 10. I wasn't expecting anyone. I never was. When the knock came, I froze. Not startled, just confused. My first thought was, they finally mixed up my address. Happens sometimes with deliveries. I opened the door just enough to see her face. Mid-20s, dark hair pulled back, eyes alert but tired. The kind of tired you don't get from lack of sleep. "Sorry to bother you," she said, voice polite but rushed. "I'm researching the history of the neighborhood. I was wondering if you'd lived here long." That question landed heavier than it should have. "Since '94, I said. I don't know why I answered. Her smile widened, relieved. "That's perfect. I'm Jade." I didn't invite her in, didn't step back. I just stood there, one hand on the door frame, the other gripping the edge like it might float away. She talked for a minute, about old houses, census records, city permits, all reasonable, all harmless. And yet, something about her made my stomach tighten. Not fear. Recognition. She glanced past me into the house. I should have closed the door then. Instead, I said, "You can come in for a minute. It's cold." That was the first mistake. We sat at the Formica table, the same one I bought after the divorce. Yellowed at the edges, indestructible. She set her notebook down carefully, like she didn't want to disturb anything, like she understood quiet. "You live alone?" she asked. "Yes." "No family nearby?" I stared at my coffee. "Not anymore." She nodded, like she understood that too. Over the next hour, she asked small questions, safe ones. And I answered them because it felt easier than explaining why I shouldn't. When she finally stood to leave, she hesitated. "Thank you," she said. "Most people don't open the door." "I don't either," I replied. She smiled at that. Then she left. I told myself, that was it. A harmless interruption. But 3 days later, she came back. And the third time, she stayed longer. By the fourth visit, I noticed she never talked about where she lived. The spare room came up a week later, just in passing. I shouldn't have mentioned it. That night, lying in bed, staring at the ceiling fan, I realized something I hadn't felt in decades: anticipation. And that's when I noticed the envelope on my hallway table, addressed to me, in handwriting I hadn't seen in over 20 years. The envelope sat on the hallway table like it had grown there, cream-colored, my name written carefully, deliberately, no return address, just Miriam Collins, in a handwriting that made my chest tighten before my mind caught up. I didn't open it right away. That's something age teaches you. You learn when not to rush. I carried it into the kitchen, set it beside the sink, and went about my evening as if it weren't there. I rinsed my mug, wiped the counter, fed the stray cat that occasionally appeared on my back porch. All the while, my eyes kept drifting back to that envelope. By the time I went to bed, it was still unopened. Sleep didn't come easily. I lay there, listening to the ceiling fan hum, counting the seconds between the grandfather clock's soft ticks. Every so often, my mind offered up possibilities. A bill? A church flyer? Some distant relative fishing for money? I hadn't received personal mail like that in years. Everything official came printed, barcoded, impersonal. This was neither. In the morning, Jade knocked again. I knew it was her before I reached the door. Same rhythm. 2 firm knocks, then a pause. When I opened it, she looked startled, like she hadn't expected me to answer so quickly. "I hope this isn't a bad time," she said. I glanced at the envelope still visible on the kitchen table behind me. "It's fine." She stepped inside, rubbing her hands together for warmth. It was early November, the kind of cold that settles into your bones. I noticed her jacket was thinner than it should have been. I noticed a faint yellow bruise near her wrist when she set her bag down. I noticed things I pretended not to. We sat at the table again. I poured coffee for both of us this time without asking. That surprised me. "You didn't tell me," I said, nodding toward the bruise. She looked down, then pulled her sleeve lower. "It's nothing." I let that sit. People my age know when pushing will shut a door faster than silence ever could. She asked about the house, when it was built, who lived here before me. I told her about the old couple, the garden they kept, the roses that never quite came back after they left. She listened closely, jotting notes, but her eyes kept drifting around the room. The china cabinet, the framed photos turned face down on the shelf, the empty corners. "You've lived here a long time," she said again. "Yes." "Ever think about leaving?" I laughed softly. "Leaving to go where?" She smiled, but it didn't reach her eyes. That afternoon, after she left, I finally opened the envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, folded once. No letterhead, just words. "Mom, I don't know if you'll read this. I don't know if you'll want to. I heard from a neighbor that you still live on Oak Ridge. I hope that's true. I'm trying one last time. I sent someone to check on you. She won't tell you why she's there unless you ask. I'm sorry. It took me so long to realize silence goes both ways." My hands shook as I read it again. And again. Thomas. I hadn't seen my son in 25 years. Not since the divorce. Not since the fight where we both said things we couldn't take back. He chose his father. I chose quiet. Or at least, that's the story I'd told myself. I sat there for a long time, paper trembling between my fingers, coffee gone cold. Sent someone to check on me. That phrase stuck. It felt invasive, calculated. And yet, Jade's face flashed in my mind. Her questions, her careful politeness, her bruised wrist. That night, I dreamed of my children as they were. Small hands, sticky with popsicle juice, tugging at my skirt. I woke with tears on my pillow and no patience for them. Over the next few weeks, Jade came often. Sometimes with questions, sometimes without. Sometimes she just sat at the table, staring out the window, twisting her fingers together. I learned she didn't sleep much. I learned she jumped at sudden noises. I learned she never talked about home. I didn't tell her about the letter. Part of me was angry. Angry that Thomas thought he could send a messenger, instead of facing me himself. Angry that he assumed I was still waiting. Another part, quieter, more dangerous, was relieved. Relieved he hadn't shown up unannounced. Relieved the distance was still intact. But things began to feel off. Jade started asking questions that weren't about the house, about my children, about when they were born, about where they went to school. Once, she asked my son's middle name, then pretended it was for a form. I watched her carefully after that. One afternoon, I found her standing in the hallway, staring at the photos I'd turned face down years ago. She jumped when she noticed me. "I'm sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to pry." "They're old," I said. "They don't matter." She hesitated. "They mattered once." That night, I pulled one photo out. Thomas at 12. Awkward smile. Too big jacket. I realized then that Jade had his eyes. The realization settled in my stomach like a stone. I said nothing. I waited. Because after 25 years of silence, I knew one thing for certain. The truth always reveals itself. You just have to be patient enough to let it. Once you notice a thing, you can't unsee it. Jade's eyes, the shape of them, the way they narrowed slightly when she listened, really listened. Thomas used to do that as a boy, especially when he knew he was in trouble, but wanted all the information before deciding how to respond. I hadn't thought about that habit in decades. Now, it was sitting across from me at my kitchen table, asking if I took sugar in my coffee. I told myself I was imagining it. People see patterns where they want them. That's human nature. I'd spent a lifetime training myself not to want too much, not to expect anything. It would be foolish to start inventing connections now. And yet, the questions kept coming, subtle as dust settling. Had I ever traveled much? Did my children like school? Was I close to my grandchildren? That last one nearly made me laugh. "I wouldn't know," I said, keeping my voice even. "I don't have any." Jade's hand tightened around her mug, just for a second. "Enough." "Oh," she said. "I just assumed." "People do." I watched her carefully after that. Watched the way she chose her words. Watched the way she studied my face when I talked about the past, as if she were comparing it to something she'd already been told. Once, when I mentioned Thomas by name, casually, like he was no one special, she flinched. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying moments I'd dismissed. Jade showing up the week after the letter arrived. Jade knowing my street name without being told. Jade's age, mid-20s. The timing lined up in a way that made my chest feel tight. My son would be in his late 40s now, plenty old enough to have a grown daughter. I swung my feet out of bed and padded down the hallway, the house creaking softly under my weight. In the spare room, the one that still smelled faintly of dust and old linen, I opened the closet and pulled down a box I hadn't touched in years. Photo albums, school papers, birthday cards. There it was. A picture of Thomas at 22. Same eyes. No question about it. I sat on the bed holding the photo, my hands trembling despite myself. I felt foolish for not seeing it sooner, and angry. Not at Jade, not yet, but at Thomas. He'd sent her. Of that, I was now certain. Sent her to test the waters, to see if I was still the cold, unreachable woman he remembered. The audacity. The next morning, Jade arrived looking worse than usual. Dark circles under her eyes, jaw tight. She asked if she could sit for a while. I nodded. Halfway through her coffee, she broke. Not dramatically. No sobbing. Just words spilling out like she'd been holding them in too long. "I left," she said. "Him. I left." I waited. He used to say I was too sensitive, that I imagined things, that nobody else would want me. She swallowed. I believed him, longer than I should have. I knew that script by heart. You don't have to explain, I said quietly. She shook her head. I do, because I don't have anywhere else. There it was, the ask without the words. I thought of the spare room, of the untouched bed, of the envelope in my drawer, of Thomas's careful handwriting. You can stay a few nights, I heard myself say, until you figure things out. Her relief was immediate and painful to watch. Over the next weeks, having Jade in the house changed the air itself. The place felt lived in. Coffee brewed twice a day. Lights left on in rooms I hadn't used. Conversation, even when sparse, filled corners that had long stayed quiet. And I started remembering things I'd tried very hard to forget. The early years after the divorce, how friends stopped calling when I declined too many invitations, how my children's visits grew shorter, more strained, how eventually they stopped altogether. I'd told myself it was their choice, easier that way. But watching Jade fold laundry in my living room, humming softly, I had to confront something I hadn't allowed myself to consider. I hadn't fought very hard to stay connected. I'd been tired, hurt, prideful. Silence had felt safer than rejection. Jade never mentioned Thomas, not once. But she slipped sometimes, calling my kitchen familiar, referring to things she knew about me before I'd told her. Once, she corrected me on the spelling of my maiden name. That was the night I knew pretending was over. We were sitting at the table, the clock chiming 9. Rain tapped against the windows. I looked at her, really looked at her, and felt something twist in my chest. You know who I am, I said. She froze. And you know who you are to me. Her eyes filled, not with surprise, with fear. He told me not to say anything, she whispered. He said if you knew, you'd shut the door. I nodded slowly. He knows me well. I didn't mean to trick you, she said quickly. I just wanted to meet you. I wanted to know where I came from. The room felt very small then. I stood, walked to the hallway, and pulled the envelope from the drawer, set it on the table between us. I've had this since the beginning, I said. I was waiting to see how much you'd tell me on your own. She looked at it, then at me, tears spilling freely now. I didn't know how. I sat back down. My hands were steady. My heart wasn't. I spent 25 years alone, I said. That wasn't all your father's doing. I chose distance because it hurt less than hoping. She nodded, wiping her face. He said you were strong. I gave a dry smile. Strong is what people call you when they don't want to help. We sat in silence, rain filling the space between us. I realized then that whatever happened next would change everything, that I couldn't go back to pretending I didn't care, and that forgiveness, real forgiveness, would require boundaries I'd never learned to set. I looked at Jade, my granddaughter, and made a decision I couldn't undo. I didn't tell Jade my decision right away. That's another thing age teaches you. You don't announce your moves before you make them. You watch, you prepare, you make sure your footing is solid before you shift your weight. The house felt different after the truth came out. Not heavier, exactly. Sharper. Every sound carried more meaning. The kettle's whistle, the click of the thermostat, even the way the floorboards creaked under Jade's steps, tentative now, like she was afraid of waking something fragile. She tried to be smaller after that, quieter, cleaning things that didn't need cleaning, thanking me too often. I recognized the behavior because I'd done the same thing myself once, back when I believed gratitude could earn safety. "Stop apologizing," I told her one afternoon as she wiped the already clean counter. "You're wearing the floor out." She smiled weakly. "I just don't want to mess things up." "That ship sailed the moment you knocked," I said. Dry humor, a release valve. She laughed, and for a moment the tension eased. But outside our little bubble, pressure was building. It started with the phone calls. I hadn't heard Thomas's voice in decades. When the phone rang that evening and the caller ID showed an unfamiliar number, I nearly let it go to voicemail. Old habits. But something in me, something newly awake, picked it up. "Mom." He sounded older, cautious, like a man testing ice. "I was wondering how you were," he said. "I'm 70, I replied. "How do you think I am?" A pause, then a sigh. "I hear you've had company." There it was. No pretense, no apology. "She told you," I said. "She said you let her stay." I closed my eyes briefly. "You sent her here without telling me who she was." "I was trying to protect her." "And me?" I asked. Silence. He launched into explanations about timing, about fear, about not wanting to reopen old wounds. I listened, hands folded neatly in my lap, the way I used to listen during arguments when I'd already decided the outcome. "You don't get to manage my life from a distance," I said when he finally ran out of words. "You gave that up when you chose silence." "I was a kid," he snapped. "You shut down after the divorce. You pushed us away." There it was, the revision of history. Clean, convenient. "I didn't chase," I said evenly. "That's not the same thing." He wanted Jade to move out, soon. He said it was for her own good, that she needed stability, that staying with me was confusing. I laughed then, a short, humorless sound. "You sent your daughter to a stranger and now you're worried about confusion?" He didn't answer that. The next day, Jade came home shaken. She'd gone to the grocery store and run into someone she didn't expect. Her father. "He didn't yell," she said, pacing the living room. "That almost made it worse. He just told me I was embarrassing him, that I'd made my point and it was time to come home." Home. The word hung there, hollow. I felt anger then, not the explosive kind, the steady, clarifying kind, the kind that sharpens your vision instead of blurring it. "He doesn't get to decide that," I said. "He says you're manipulating me," she whispered, "that you're lonely and using me." That one stung more than I expected, because part of it wasn't entirely wrong. I was lonely. I had been for a long time. But using her? No. What we were building wasn't exploitation. It was mutual survival. That night, I pulled out my old address book. The physical one. Worn leather. Pages yellowed. Names crossed out. I hadn't touched it in years. There were people in there I'd written off. Friends I'd stopped calling because I didn't want to explain my sadness. A sister I'd kept at arm's length. Even a lawyer's number, scribbled in the margin from the divorce days. I made calls. Not all of them were answered. That was fine. Some bridges stay burned. But a few surprised me. My sister, a former coworker. Even the lawyer, older now, but still sharp. I asked questions, quiet ones, about rights, about residency, about what happens when an adult child tries to control an elderly parent for their own good. I didn't tell Jade what I was doing. Not yet. She needed rest, not strategy. Thomas called again 2 days later, more insistent this time. He wanted a timeline. He wanted assurances. He wanted control. "You always did this," he said. You go quiet, then you drop something heavy on people. I smiled to myself. He remembered me better than he realized. Meanwhile, Jade started settling in despite herself, cooking dinner, planting bulbs in the backyard, laughing more easily. And that frightened her father, because a stable woman is harder to manipulate than a desperate one. The pressure increased, subtle threats, offers disguised as concern. He mentioned legal options, guardianship, just in case. That word, just in case. I'd heard it before. It's what people say when they want power without looking cruel. I sat at the kitchen table one evening, the envelope from Thomas spread open beside me, listening to the clock tick. I realized then that this wasn't just about Jade or me. This was about who gets to define your life when you're older. Who decides whether your boundaries are respected or dismissed as confusion? And I knew something else too. Thomas was about to make a move he thought I wouldn't see coming. I should have paid closer attention to what happened next. It started with a knock. Not Jade's knock. Not careful. Not polite. This one was sharp, impatient, like whoever was on the other side already believed they had the right to be there. I was in the kitchen, chopping carrots for soup. Jade was in the living room, folding laundry. The clock read 4:17 p.m. Ordinary moments are like that. They don't announce the end of anything. "I'll get it," Jade said, already moving. "No," I replied, setting the knife down. "I will." I knew who it was before I opened the door. Mothers know things long before logic catches up. Thomas stood on the porch, coat too nice for the weather, jaw tight. Behind him, a woman I didn't recognize, mid-40s, professional posture, clipboard held like a shield. "Mom," he said, stiff. "We need to talk." "I don't talk on the porch," I said. "You can come in. She can stay outside." The woman raised an eyebrow. Thomas hesitated, then waved her back. 5 minutes, he told her. The house felt smaller with him inside. Too much history squeezed into narrow hallways. Jade hovered near the doorway, eyes wide. "You didn't tell me you were coming," I said. "I didn't think I needed permission." "That's been your mistake for a while now." He got right to it. No small talk, no apology. "I'm taking Jade home," he said. "This arrangement isn't healthy." Jade stiffened. "You don't get to decide that." He turned on her quickly. "I'm your father. And I'm not a child. I watch them the way you watch a storm you can't stop, only prepare for." "She's staying," I said. Thomas laughed. "You can't be serious. You barely know her." "I know enough." He stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Mom, this is exactly why I was hesitant. You get attached. You confuse things." I felt something click into place then. Calm, focused. "You sent her here," I said. "You don't get to act surprised when she stayed." "That wasn't the plan." "Plans have a way of falling apart when people aren't honest." He looked past me toward the hallway, toward the spare room, toward a space he hadn't been invited into. "You're 70, living alone. This looks bad." "For whom?" I asked. "For everyone." There it was, the concern masquerading as threat. Jade spoke up, voice shaking but steady. "I'm not leaving. Not because you tell me to." "You don't know what you're doing," he snapped. "You think this is safe? You think she's stable?" That did it. I stepped between them. "You will not talk about me like I'm not standing here." He scoffed. "You shut us out for decades. Now you want to play grandmother of the year?" I smiled then. Slow, deliberate. I never asked for that title, but I won't be erased from my own life. The woman on the porch knocked, harder this time. "Thomas, we need to go." He ignored her. "I spoke to a lawyer," he said. "This can get complicated." "So can pushing people who've finally stopped being afraid," I replied. I walked to the hallway table and picked up the envelope, handed it to him. "I've had this since the beginning," I said. "You don't get credit for trying once after 25 years. His face flushed. "You never reached out either." "I didn't ambush you with a messenger." Jade looked between us, tears in her eyes. "You told me she wouldn't care." Thomas faltered. "Just a second." "Enough." "I said she might not," he corrected. "That's not the same," she said. The woman outside cleared her throat loudly. Thomas finally looked rattled. "This doesn't have to be ugly," he said, softer now. "Too late," I replied. I walked to the front door and opened it wide. "You're done here." He stared at me, stunned. "You're choosing her? Over your son?" I met his eyes. "I'm choosing honesty over fear. There's a difference." He left without another word. The woman followed, heels sharp against concrete. Their car pulled away, tires crunching gravel. The silence afterward was deafening. Jade sank into a chair, hands shaking. "I'm sorry." I poured tea. Chamomile. The good kind. "This isn't over," I said, handing her a mug. "But you're not alone." She looked at me, searching. "What if he really tries something?" I sat across from her, steady. "Then he'll find out I'm not as helpless as he remembers." Because, while Thomas thought he was cornering me, I'd already made sure the ground under his feet wasn't as solid as he believed. Thomas had always assumed I stayed still. That was his greatest mistake. The morning after he stormed out of my house, I slept better than I had in years. No ceiling staring, no rehearsed conversations in my head, just deep, uninterrupted sleep that comes when you finally stop bracing yourself for impact. When I woke, the house was quiet in a comfortable way. Jade was still asleep in the spare room. I made coffee, the percolator sputtering its familiar rhythm, and sat at the table with my notebook open. The one I used for grocery lists and reminders. That morning, I used it for something else. I wrote down facts, not feelings, not grievances. Facts have weight. They hold up in rooms where emotions are dismissed. Fact 1, I was legally competent. No history of dementia. No medical records suggesting otherwise. Fact 2, Jade was an adult, employed part-time, paying for her own phone, no court order, no dependency. Fact 3, my home was paid off. No shared assets, no leverage. Fact 4, Thomas had shown up unannounced with a third party who appeared prepared to document my instability. That last one mattered. I'd learned long ago that when someone shows up with paperwork, they're not there to talk. They're there to establish a narrative. I called my lawyer that afternoon. Same man from years ago. Voice slower now, but mind still sharp. "Guardianship?" he repeated when I explained. "They'd have a hard time." I thought so. "Harder still if you've already documented intent." I smiled into the receiver. "I have." We talked for an hour. About living wills, about medical proxies, about how quickly concern can be weaponized when someone wants control. By the time I hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in decades. Prepared. When Jade woke, she found me organizing files at the dining table. "You're busy," she said carefully. "I'm thorough," I replied. She sat across from me, watching. "Is this because of him?" "In part." "And the rest?" I met her eyes. "Because no one gets to decide my life without my consent. Not anymore." That afternoon, Thomas called again. His tone had changed, less sharp, more cautious. "I might have overreacted," he said. "You brought a stranger with a clipboard to my door?" I replied. "That's not an overreaction. That's a strategy." He exhaled slowly. "I just want what's best for everyone." "Then listen," I said. "You don't get to use my age as leverage. If you try, I'll respond formally." A pause. Then carefully, "Is that a threat?" "No," I said. "It's a boundary." That word unsettled him more than anger ever could. The days that followed were quiet, too quiet. No surprise visits, no follow-up calls. I knew better than to mistake silence for surrender. Then the letter arrived. Certified. Official looking, from a law firm across town. Jade found it in the mailbox and brought it inside, eyes wide. "Is this?" "Yes," I said, already standing. "This is what he thinks will scare me." It was a notice of intent, not action. A probe. He was testing whether I'd fold. I didn't. Instead, I sent my own letter. Through my lawyer, clear, documented, calm. I named my medical proxy. I named my power of attorney. I stated my residency choice. I included a request that any further contact regarding my competency go through legal channels. In other words, I closed the door properly. When Thomas called after receiving it, his voice was tight. "You didn't have to escalate." "You escalated when you tried to take control," I replied. Silence stretched between us. Not the old, heavy silence. This one was different. This one made space for truth. "I thought you were weak," he said finally. I laughed softly. Most people confuse quiet with weakness. Jade listened from the hallway. Later, she hugged me, careful, like she wasn't sure she had the right. "I didn't know you could do all this," she said. "Neither did I replied. "Turns out, I just needed a reason." Thomas didn't try again after that. Not legally, not directly. Instead, something else happened. People started asking questions. A cousin reached out. A former neighbor. Even my sister called again, this time curious, not cautious. Word travels when someone's control slips. And Thomas, for the first time in decades, wasn't directing the story. I sat on the porch one evening, watching Jade plant winter pansies, and realized something important. This wasn't revenge. This was reclamation. And Thomas knew it. Because when someone realizes you're no longer afraid of losing them, that's when they understand how badly they've already lost. It's funny how quickly power shifts when people stop whispering. I didn't announce anything. I didn't post updates or make phone calls explaining myself. I simply went on living, openly this time. Jade stayed. I kept my routines. And slowly, almost imperceptibly, the silence around me changed its tone. The first sign was my sister, Helen. She showed up one Saturday afternoon with a loaf of banana bread and a look on her face I hadn't seen since we were girls. Curious, guarded, but willing. She stood on the porch for a moment, like she wasn't sure she'd been invited, even though I'd told her twice she was welcome. "Well," she said, stepping inside, "you look the same." "That's the trick," I replied. "I always have." She glanced around the house, noticing the small changes, the extra coat by the door, shoes that weren't mine. Laughter drifting in from the kitchen where Jade was chopping onions, eyes watering. "So," Helen said slowly, "I heard you've been busy." I raised an eyebrow. "Busy doing what?" "Standing your ground," she said. "People are talking." People always are. I'd just stopped caring. We sat at the table, banana bread between us, coffee steaming. Helen told me Thomas had been calling around, asking questions, not accusatory ones, nervous ones. He wanted to know who was influencing me, who I was seeing, what I was planning. That boy always did like to manage things, Helen said dryly. I smiled. He learned it from his father. The thing about control is that it doesn't survive daylight. Once people start comparing notes, the story fractures. And Thomas's version, the one where I was fragile, confused, easily led, didn't hold up under scrutiny. Jade noticed it too. Less tension when she ran errands. No more messages from her father that started with, I'm worried about you, and ended with, come home. He'd gone quiet again, but this time it wasn't strategic. It was reactive. One evening, as we cleared dinner dishes, Jade said, he hasn't called in 2 weeks. That's new, I replied. I think he's embarrassed. I considered that. Good. Embarrassment can be instructive. What I didn't tell her, what I was still sitting with, was the letter I'd received that morning. Not legal, not official, personal, from Thomas. No envelope theatrics this time, just a folded page, handwriting tighter than before. I didn't think you had it in you, it began. I thought if I waited long enough, you'd stay where I left you. That sentence did something to me. Not anger, clarity. He went on. About fear, about feeling judged, about how my withdrawal after the divorce had felt like rejection to him. He didn't apologize, not really, but he admitted something that mattered. I was wrong about you. I folded the letter carefully and placed it back in the envelope. Some words are meant to be acknowledged, not answered. The real shift came a week later. Jade came home early from work, face pale, hands shaking. He told me the truth, she said. I set my book down slowly. Which truth? Why he really sent me here. I waited. He didn't just want to reconnect with you, she said. He wanted to prove something, that you were unstable, that you couldn't be trusted with family. My jaw tightened. To whom? To his wife, she said, and her parents. That landed hard. Inheritance, legacy, appearances. I'd seen this play before, just with different actors. He told them you'd shut everyone out, Jade continued, that you were bitter, that I'd be safer away from you. And now? And now, she said quietly, they're asking questions. About him. That was the part he hadn't anticipated, because once Jade spoke up, once she told her story honestly, his narrative collapsed. You can't paint someone as manipulative when the person you sent to expose them comes back stronger, steadier, and grateful. He's scared, Jade said. Not of you, of losing face. I nodded. That's usually what it's about. We sat together in the living room, the old clock ticking, the house warm with the smell of soup simmering. I thought about how close I'd come to staying locked away, to letting others define me, because it was easier than pushing back. I don't hate him, I said after a while, but I won't protect him from the consequences of his choices. Jade leaned her head on my shoulder, just for a moment. Enough. The next day, Thomas showed up again, this time alone. No clipboard, no lawyer, just him. I didn't invite him in right away. We stood on the porch, the November air sharp between us. You were right, he said, about a lot of things. I usually am, I replied. Eventually. He looked past me into the house. She seems settled. She is. I didn't think you'd fight, he admitted. That's because you thought I was still the woman who went quiet to survive, I said. I'm not. He nodded. I see that now. We talked, carefully, not forgiving yet, but honest. As he left, he turned back. I don't know what happens next. That makes two of us. I said. But as I closed the door, I realized something else had shifted. Something final. Because there was one truth Thomas still didn't know I was holding. And when he found out, everything would finally make sense. There's a particular kind of quiet that comes after a storm. Not the tense quiet you brace against, but the settled kind. The kind that lets your shoulders drop without you realizing they were clenched. That's what my house felt like in the weeks after Thomas's last visit. Nothing dramatic happened. No shouting, no final speeches, just a slow return to normal. Except this time, normal included laughter drifting down the hallway and an extra mug drying on the rack. Jade stayed. Not because she had nowhere else to go, but because she chose to. She found a better job across town, bought sturdier boots for winter, started sleeping through the night. Small things, but I'd learned those were the ones that mattered. Trauma leaves quietly when it's no longer fed. As for me, I settled into a rhythm I didn't know I'd been missing. Mornings with 2 cups of coffee instead of 1. Evenings with conversation instead of the television murmuring to an empty room. Sundays where I cooked too much food on purpose. People started reaching out again, not crowds, just a few. A neighbor who'd always waved but never stopped. A woman from the library who remembered me from years ago. Even my sister called more often, not out of obligation, but interest. It turns out when you stop hiding, people adjust their behavior. Some step closer, some step back. Both reactions tell you what you need to know. Thomas called once more. His voice was different, less guarded, less certain. I didn't realize how much control mattered to me, he admitted, until I lost it. That's usually how it works, I said. There was a pause. Then quietly, you were never weak, were you? I smiled to myself. No, I was tired. He didn't argue with that. I didn't tell him everything, not yet. Some truths don't need to be announced. They just need to be lived. But there was one thing he still didn't know. The final piece. The truth that tied everything together. A month after his visit, I finalized my estate planning. Clean, simple, intentional. I didn't do it out of spite. I did it out of clarity. Jade sat beside me in the lawyer's office, reading quietly while I signed. When we walked out into the cold sunlight, she looked at me carefully. You didn't have to do that, she said. I know, I replied. That's why it matters. She didn't ask questions. She didn't need to. Later that night, as we sat at the kitchen table, I told her the truth Thomas still didn't know. I left something for you, I said calmly. Not because you're family, but because you showed up, honestly. Her eyes widened. Grandma? I didn't give it to you to fix anything, I said gently. I gave it to you so no one can ever use need as a weapon against you again. She cried then, quietly, the kind of tears that come from relief, not pain. I realized something important in that moment, something I wish I'd understood decades earlier. They mistook my silence for weakness. That was their error, not mine. Thomas eventually found out, through proper channels. No confrontation, no argument. He didn't call right away. When he did, weeks later, his voice was steady. I understand, he said. I don't like it, but I understand. That's all I require, I replied. We speak now. Occasionally, carefully. Boundaries are strange like that. They don't push people away. They show them where to stand. As for Jade, she moved into her own place in the Seine. Spring. Close enough for Sunday dinners. Far enough to breathe. She still knocks when she comes over. I still open the door. Sometimes I think about the woman I was at 45, freshly divorced, exhausted, convinced isolation was strength. I don't judge her. She did the best she could with what she knew. But I wish she'd known this sooner. Sometimes the best revenge is choosing peace with your eyes open. At 70, I finally understand something that took me a lifetime to learn. I didn't reopen my heart because someone deserved it. I reopened it because I did. And that knock on my door, it didn't change everything. It revealed what was already waiting. If this story resonated with you, please subscribe to Echo Lens Stories. Your support means the world to me, and it helps me continue sharing these stories that matter. Thank you for listening.